the Converted Man here. Okay, so did Jesus exist and does it matter? Now, I wanted to do a little bit on this topic because I'd had a conversation off the air with a Christian about Jesus's existence. And his defense of the existence of Jesus contained a number of logical fallacies that I wanted to go over, the common sort of arguments for Jesus's existence, and explain why those don't work and how to better shape them, and go over whether or not it really matters. Well, that's for the skeptic or the atheist, because for the Christian, it would really matter that Jesus existed. So, oh, already got a person. Richard says, maybe / kinda, not really, easy day. Okay. Well, there's reasons to be skeptical of this person's existence, and the counterfactual to that is, well, but historians seem to agree that this person existed, which is a defense that the person made. It's like all well, they said all historians agree that no, not all historians. Historians that bother to write about Jesus tend to agree. Not all of them, though, because there are a few that don't agree. So you're already making a statement that's not true when you say that. And really all you're doing is appealing to the majority and authority. You're saying, well, because all these people agree and because they're authority, therefore it's true. No, that's not good enough. Well, why do they say it's true? That's more important. What are they basing their conclusion on? If they're just basing it on the four gospels, I would put them in the category of not mattering, because you have to then establish any and or all of the gospels as being remotely true. Otherwise, you're just engaged in a circular argumentation. And so I would need to know the names of these historians. I would need to know what it is that they examined to make the conclusion that this person existed. And then I would need to know what they believed in personally, because that will influence their decision. And all of that is important. So without a list of names to examine, just saying, well, all these historians agree, doesn't really say anything. Of course, the Christian scholars, they're going to say that Christ existed. Theological scholars are probably going to say that Christ existed, although they might not believe in the divinity of him. But by agreeing that Jesus existed, it could help them lay out theistic arguments for other figures that are mythology to be factual rather than just myth or legend. And so in one way, they have to say, yeah, sure, Jesus existed. Now, but that's not important, because I want to tell you about why Venetia is real, and that this person was talked to by Venetia, and yada, 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 whatever the argument is. So by supporting one thing that's not real, they can prop up something else that's not real, possibly. Although we don't know their true motive. We can't know their motive. But what we can know is what their methodology is. So without those things in place, all we have is a pure appeal to authority and majority. So, and the other thing he had brought up was, well, I said Richard Carrier doesn't believe that this person existed. He said, well, he's a laughing stock, and everyone that doesn't believe it is a laughing stock, and nobody takes him seriously. I said, that's irrelevant. Doesn't matter, because that's an appeal to emotion. It's completely irrelevant whether or not you're the minority or people mock your idea. You could still be correct. So that's not a good argument either. So rather than pointing to X, Y, and Z historians because again, we would need to know their names, what their methodology is, and what they believe. Just point to the evidence. And I made the statement that there's no archaeological evidence, no empirical evidence of Jesus. And also, I made the statement that there's very little archaeological evidence for a lot of the things in the New Testament. And that was just like, oh, no, yes, of course there is. Really? Where? And the problem is that there, concerning that, there's been forgeries that have happened in archaeology that have been known, perpetrated by Christians to get certain locations to be established. There's a thriving tourism in Jerusalem that requires these places to be established. So you can even walk the path that Jesus supposedly walked when he carried his cross to his eventual demise. How in the bleep would they know that from history? Well, they don't. So they just said, "Oh, this is the path that he walked," so that people will walk that path, and people do walk that path, and they get tourism money from that. So, um, so I'll address. By the way, I'll address all the chat in a bit, but I wanted to get through this first. So, a good argument would be for any historical figure would be to show what documents are known to exist that reference that person, and what those documents say about that person would be another thing. So, in regards to this particular historical figure, we have the Gospels, and then we have Tacitus and Josephus, and that's it. Now, he said that there's 140 historians that also attest to Jesus. Don't know. That's an interesting number to pull out of the ether. I have no idea who he's talking about. So I'm waiting for that list to be produced by him or anyone else for that matter. I'm not aware of it. And somebody mentioned Wikipedia. Wikipedia is not aware of these historians either. So, and these were people supposedly around at the time of Jesus or later than the time of Jesus, within 20 to 30 years of Jesus, supposedly, or something like that, which would be impressive if that was true. But we don't have that. We have two historians that were pretty late to the game. I'd have to do it off the top of my head, so I'm not going to say how early Josephus and Tacitus are to the game, but let's just say that they're 20 years later. That's still a long enough time to establish a legend. In fact, it's very quickly that a legend could be established. They're farther out than 20 years, but the exact number is not in my head. I'd have to look it up, and I don't care right now. It's not really that important. What's important is when they do reference him, they're actually referencing the followers and saying, yeah, the followers believe this. Okay, so the followers believe that. And that's it. That's what they say. There's Christians, and they exist, and they believe this stuff. All right. And then, of course, with Josephus, we then get a tacked on known forgery that is like, oh, and by the way, no, Jesus is really real, and I believe that he died for our sins, and he loves us all. Jesus is awesome, blah blah blah. And it's totally not Tacitus, and it's obvious and clear forgery, which then makes the rest of what is written about Jesus in his stuff suspect. You now have to be like, well, they were willing to forge this. And then you have to ask this question: why would somebody make up something when it's true? Why would you need to lie about something if that thing is an actual event? Why would you need to go in and forgery over Josephus and try to make Jesus more real if you already have evidence that he's real? So maybe you're doing that to make it seem real because you know that there's not enough evidence to show that he's real. Just saying. There's more reason to doubt when a forgery happens. Along those lines, there's been a couple of different expeditions, and I'll be covering this more in depth later on sometime this or next year. I'm not sure what, but I'm working together with this gentleman on a historical project that's going to analyze the history of the Bible. So it's going to happen. It's just going to be a while. So don't expect it anytime soon. But at any rate, there's been at least 2 expeditions that I know of that were paid by and funded by Christian organizations and contained Christians, and they came and they forgeried. One of them was coins at the bottom of a well, and how I know it was a forgery was the first archaeology team came in, found a well. There was nothing in it to date it. The best way to date a well is coins. They didn't find any coins. So they said, okay, it's a well, it's historic, and that's all we know. We don't know anything else. We can't place it in its proper time. And so it just doesn't really, it's interesting, but that's it. The archaeology team that came in sometime later that was funded by the Christians, all of a sudden they find coins at the bottom of the well that date that well to the date that they needed it to be, so it could be part of either Bethlehem or Nazareth, and I don't recall which off the top of my head because it was a long time ago that I stumbled onto this. So basically, they faked the results. Now, on top of that, they also wouldn't let anyone examine the coins. So, they said, "Hey, we found these coins. See, they date the well perfectly." Oh no, you want to look at them? No, you can't do that. And then there was a second time that something like that happened where the Christians found archaeological evidence that would help establish a location, and then they wouldn't let any other archaeology team examine their evidence. And they had like, oh, well, you'll destroy it, or you'll hurt it, or you'll, whatever. And it's like, what? True archaeology, they want people to look at their stuff. If you have a forgery, and forgery in the archaeology game is big money, so there's a monetary motive to make fake fossils or fake artifacts, and that's true in every archaeological instance. So when you find something as an archaeologist, or even as just a random Joe Schmo, and it could be something significant historically, you want it to be verified by as many people as possible, because once it is, then you can make your money on it. If you don't let people verify it, then it might be fake, and you could still potentially make money on it in the black market, but you're not going to be credited for it in any sort of serious scientific paper. So if this thing is legitimate, you want people to look at it. If it's forged, you don't want anyone to look at it, because they're going to realize that it's a forgery. So if Christians are willing to lie about their own history, what else are they willing to lie about, right? And so it gives you a big red flag. Then, of course, there's the problem that Jesus is attributed all this legendary status. What I mean by that is when he's walking around the various places, Bethlehem, Nazareth, Galilee, whatever, he's attracting crowds of insane sizes. He's bigger than the Beatles, essentially. And yet, historical writers and politic writers of the time that Jesus supposedly walked the earth have zero comments on this figure. They say nothing about Jesus at all, not a thing. And that's an absence of evidence, which, of course, you would say, well, that's not an evidence of absence. No, but it's a bad thing to not have them comment on this person. It makes it seem like what he's doing couldn't have been that big, because it would have been noticed and somebody would have recorded it, because, somebody, if you have a celebrity in town, that's news. You're going to report it. Nobody reported it. Yeah, that's a little bit suspicious there. So maybe he's not as popular as the Bible makes him out to be. Okay, but he still did stuff. Maybe you want to say that. Okay, well, what stuff did he do? Well, he did these miracles. Well, there's no proof that miracles ever happen in the first place. And then there's the additional problem of identifying a true miracle. So you would have to establish that miracles are a thing that actually do occur, and then how to identify them in order to claim that miracles happened in the past. You can't do that. Nobody can do it. Nobody has done it. So he couldn't have done those miracles. And it doesn't help to say, well, but it can't be proven to not have happened. No, that's not how it works. Burden is to show that they did happen, and or that they're possible to happen. Not just say, but they could have happened. No. So none of the miracles could have happened. So, okay, it's not as popular as he was. You have to take that away from him. Now you have to take away the miracles. So what's left? Well, maybe what he said. Well, what did he say? Really nothing much that hadn't been said before. So it wasn't really that impressive per se, but the only evidence that we have of him saying anything comes from the people that believe that he existed, written after he's gone off the face of the earth. So until then, until it's written down, all we have is oral stories of this person that are being transmuted from one person to the other. And for anyone that's played the telephone game with your friends, you know how easy it is to get words wrong. And when you tell a story, even if a large group hears that story, as that story gets told, things will get added and taken away from the story to make it more interesting as time goes on. So whoever you're left with a person that might have been named Jesus, who might have said things, and whatever those things are, who knows? And so at the end of it, even if you want to say that Jesus is a historical figure, the Jesus that was the historical figure is so far removed from the Jesus we know, it might as well not be the same person. So why bother believing that he existed? And then if the only argument for that is, well, historians agree that he existed, you don't have an argument, and then you should be skeptical that he existed, as I am. But, well, is there counter evidence to his existence? That's kind of an odd way of looking at it. And well, Richard Currier has written about this, but in short, there's some way to establish the idea that Jesus was thought of as a celestial being at first, and then later made into a human being. And there is precedent that could have happened in the early church, and there's some indications that could have happened, but not many. So it could have been just a ghost that then became a person, essentially. Or it could be that, it was this guy named Jesus that had some ideas. No way to know the difference between the two. And then, of course, you have Paul, who's the earliest writings of Christ are Paul, who says, I talked to Jesus, and Jesus actually said to me that he was a real person. So you have a revelation of Jesus being transmuted to somebody that then says, no, Jesus was an actual historical figure. So is that history being revised so that now that Jesus is established as a historical figure, we can't pretend like we hear from Jesus all the time, because he actually did things, and there's people that you can talk to that totally saw those things. They're still alive today. Did anyone go and check with them? Was there any reports, any writings, anything that those people looked into it further? No. Why? Well, because it's an argument of popularity. All these other people saw him, and they're like, yeah, okay, you're an authority figure. You're talking with authority. You're charismatic. You've interacted with these churches. Okay, we believe you. And there's no checking. Nobody checked, because nothing is written where somebody checked. And then, of course, you come to what I think is the biggest problem of all, which is the Jews and the early Christians had a tradition, and this should blow your mind if you haven't heard of it. They took the writing of the Holy Scripture, and if it was worn out, the tradition would be that somebody would copy it, by, careful every page by hand, because they didn't have copy machines back then, right? Okay, so they would copy it. Okay, well, that makes sense because the other one's worn out, right? So, well, what would they do next? Obviously, they would store the old one because it's history. No, 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 no. They burned the old one. They burned it up. It's gone now. So, any mistakes that happened during that copying process are now permanent as part of the record. And the next person that copies it might introduce new mistakes, or whether deliberate or not, they're like, oh, I don't like that Jesus said that. He's not going to say that now. It's just going to get rid of that. Nobody's going to be able to check because the other one's going to be gone. Brilliant. So there you go. So does it matter? Is the next part I want to go over. Okay, and this is the part for the skeptic atheist, is does it matter? And what I mean by this is you have somebody, let's say Matt Dillahunty, who's talked about, we shouldn't get distracted, if you will, on whether Jesus existed or not, because it doesn't really matter. It's kind of a moot point. And what he means by that, well, I'm going to paraphrase. I'm going to say what he means by that, even though you might have a different idea of what he means by that. But what I view what he said is that if you get lost in the minutia of debating whether this guy existed or not, you're missing the point, because the point is whether or not God exists. There's people that call themselves Christians that don't think that Jesus was God. And the person that I talked to just recently that started me on thinking about this topic didn't believe Jesus was God. Okay. But they still called themselves a Christian. They still believed in God and still believed that Jesus died and came back. And that was because of God. Now, there's the problem that Matt Dillahunty says is, even if Jesus really did exist and really did this miracle event, how does that prove God? And that's the key point to focus on, because you're arguing over whether God exists or not, hypothetically speaking, rather than arguing about whether Jesus exists or not, because the more important question is whether God exists or not. And okay, so we have a person who did miracle event X, Y, and Z, and that proves that they're God, or does it prove that there's a God? Either way, no. Because what association causation link can you have between miracle event and God's existence? You'd have to establish that. You'd have to say, because miracles exist, therefore God. But what leads from one to the other? And then, of course, you go back to the problem of identifying miracles in the first place. And that's a task that no theist or apologist has ever been able to accomplish, to my knowledge. So there you go. So by focusing instead on, okay, fine, I'll grant you, I'll tentatively grant you everything that I can. But when you say, okay, well, Jesus came back from the dead, and that's a miracle. Okay, great. How does that prove that God exists? And and then you give them the thought experiment. If I died and came back from the dead, would that prove that I'm God? If not, why not? Or they say, well, maybe they want to say, well, that would prove there's a God. Why? How? How does that prove there's a God? What if I, plant in somebody a technology that would allow them to come back after a death, nanobots, for example. Okay. And so they die on the operating table and we'll go, yeah, they're dead. And, then I activate the nanobots in secret and then they come back to life. Does that prove God? No, no. And if I don't then let you examine the person, and check them out, you won't find out about the nanobots. And thus I can make this claim that he came back from the dead by God. But it's a trick, right? So obviously that's technology we don't have yet, but I'm just putting that out there as a thought experiment. Just because you have an unexplained phenomenon doesn't therefore mean God, because that is an appeal to ignorance. I don't understand X, therefore Y. My door opens by itself, or seemingly by itself. Obviously, it's not opening by itself. Something is causing it to open. And I say, aha, it must be a ghost. Well, do I know that ghosts even exist? No. I could believe that ghosts exist, but I couldn't establish that ghosts exist. And to make an appeal to something that has not yet been proven and say that's the answer because I didn't know the answer, I didn't know why my door opened, that's an appeal to ignorance. So in one sense, you could, again, you could say, well, it doesn't matter. We shouldn't focus on whether Jesus existed or not because it misses the bigger problem. Unless you're debating about whether Jesus existed, then of course you would want to focus on it, right? But maybe the case is made that we shouldn't even debate about it because it misses the bigger picture. I like the fact that we can debate about things, so I don't think that we should say we shouldn't debate X, Y, or Z because of reasons. But I think that for myself, I don't believe it because I've satisfied myself by looking at the evidence for and against, and there's really no evidence for. So the evidence against then is more credible to me. But I could be wrong. And ultimately, I'd love to be shown I was wrong or proven wrong because then I learned something. Maybe I missed something. Maybe I, didn't read enough of. Who's the one that is the historian that's an atheist that agrees that Jesus existed? I can't think of his name off the top of my head, but it's not Richard Curry is the only thing coming in my brain, and that's not his name. That's the other one. Whatever his name is. Maybe I haven't read enough of his books, and I read too much Richard Curry. I didn't read Richard Curry either. I just know of what he's written. Bart Ehrman. Thank you, Paul the Skeptic. Bart Ehrman. So I haven't read Bart Ehrman, so therefore, I'm making an argument out of ignorance. Well, maybe I am. That's very possible. So then I read Bart Ehrman, and then I read Richard, and I read whoever else, and then I come to conclusion Z. And of course, the person that wants to disagree could just say, but you didn't look at this book, and you're forever chasing this endless rabbit hole, if you will, because you missed this book, or you misinterpreted it, you ignored this evidence or whatever, because you can't possibly be right. You have to be wrong. Okay, well, And then the final thing I'll say that they mentioned, because it is a part of the appeal to authority. They asked me, so you're smarter than the historians. You're smarter than the archaeologists. And I said, yeah, I am. And now the reason I said yes is, well, I shouldn't have said yes because that's an emotional response. But the question, I should have said that question is irrelevant and loaded. And the reason it's irrelevant and loaded is because it doesn't matter if I know more than these people or not. They could still be wrong. And just because they have authority doesn't make them right. But I said yes because I was just like, ugh, whatever. This stupid question, And I was just like, yeah, sure, I know more than they do. Now what? Because the point was, well, now what are you going to say in response to that? Because as far as you know, maybe I do know more. Then what? What does it matter if I knew more than them or less than them? And if you can't answer that question, then there's something wrong with your logic, because the answer should be, doesn't matter if you know more or less than they do. What matters is, what is your conclusion based upon? What is the argument at hand? The argument matters, not the amount of people. So the majority of scientists in the world agree that biological evolution is true. Does that mean it's true? No. What makes it true is the evidence. That's the argument, is the evidence, not that people say it's true. Okay, now to turn it over to chat and read through chat. So I'm going to be quiet for a moment. Let's see. Richard said that. I said that he said that. Let's see. There's bigger problems with the Old Testament. I agree. There's a lot of problems. First of all, Hans P.S. Hansen, one of the biggest problem. Well, I mean, one of the problems in the Old Testament is camels were not yet domesticated at the time that that they would have had to be domesticated for people to use them as beasts of burden. So anytime and every time that the Bible mentions camels, nope, they weren't there. So that's a problem. Let's see. Johnny says the answer is, how many licks does it take to get it to the center of a Tootsie Pop? It's 1,112. I tested it twice and it was that number each time. So there you go. No, just messing around. What's funny about that question is that on their website of Tootsie Pop actually has its own website, and they show that people have tried to test this with different methods, robots and whatnot, and everyone gets different results. Well, of course, because what does it mean to lick? You have to define this ambiguous term first before you could answer the question. I note. I think that's how you say it. George said, if Wikipedia doesn't say that Jesus existed, then didn't. No, that's not. No, you know, if it's not on the internet, it doesn't exist, and if it's on the internet, then it does exist, right? No, I mean, again, that's kind of just citing an authority source, and what Wikipedia does say is there's no archaeological or empirical evidence of Jesus, and I'm like, well, there you go. That's what I said. I said that, and it happens to be that Wikipedia agrees with that statement. Well, if there's a counterfactual to that, then you can always change Wikipedia. But forget about Wikipedia. It's just show me that statement's wrong. Let's see. There's some books missing from the period that Jesus should have existed. That's a tough one to go into, so I'll leave that alone for now, because there is a period of silence, and that's, again, perhaps because the tradition of burning the old books. But when Christianity did take a big hold, they did destroy a lot of writings of the time that were pagan, that were any other religion but theirs. They would destroy the statues and things like that. So we did lose a lot in history when Christianity took over. But that's a common motif of a lot of people when they take over places, that they would burn books or destroy what was there so that they could, the winner makes the history. So, and Richard wanted to know when, or he was, oh, okay. So Einat was saying, let's suppose Jesus exists. So what? And Richard was saying, well, that's the second part. Okay. Yesterday, what? Huh? Oh, okay. Is there any human in history that performed miracles and we got proof? No. We'd have to prove that miracles are real. There are humans that are attributed miracles. So, well, we have to doubt that the miracles happen. The person might exist, but I would say that, say Alexander the Great. Okay, there was some miracle stuff. So if there's writings about that person where they didn't do miracles, I would say those are more credible than the ones that do have miracles. Now, of course, the ones where they don't have miracles could still be made up, but at least they're more plausible than the other one, because the other one is not yet established to be a thing. So miracles have to be established to be a thing before you can even think that they ever happened in the first place. Do Jews have proof of Moses splitting the sea in two? Not that I'm aware of. Let's see. Or he turns sticks into snakes. Yeah, the minor miracle events that any person in the Old or New Testament did or was said to do could be an illusionist trick, like a magician in the current day, where people know how to do these tricks. And even in the Bible, it says that the Pharaoh had magicians that also could do the same tricks. And the idea was their power, some Christians say, comes from demons, and other Christians say no, they were fake. They were just like the illusionists that we have today. But Moses's thing was really real. And I'm like, how do you know? We're talking, and then Thor's mentioned, well, that's a whole nother kettle of fish. Let's see, what else? Okay, let's see. Okay. All right, so I think I read through all of the chat that was that I wanted to read through. Sorry, everybody. I love you all. But I addressed all the main questions that are pertinent to the topic at hand. I think if I missed any, go ahead, everybody, yell out what I missed or ask me questions right now. I probably should show chat on the screen, but I'm gonna let laziness prevail. Why don't I have more subscribers again? Oh, right, that's probably why. So anything else out there, guys, gals, robots, etc.? While they're typing furiously, I'm going to pontificate on what can I pontificate about? Let's see. I can complain that I didn't get invited to the thing that's happening in Texas. I could complain about that, but whatever, Yeah. And P.S. Hansen was saying that the thing about missing books, it was history books in the period that Jesus was alive that went missing. Yeah, well, again, a lot of history was lost when Christians took over because they destroyed a lot of that stuff. And that's not just something you can blame particularly on Christians, because it was common practice that a taking over event would also incorporate destroying the history and destroying those statues that were there. And you can kind of point to some modern events that almost echo that. There was the events where people were taking down statues that they felt were representative of slave owners, for example. And they were doing this without any permission from the city or whatever. They were just average Joes and Janes that were tearing these statues down because it made them upset that statue was up. Well, that's tearing down history. Yeah, that person might indeed be a slave owner, and so, well, but you were celebrating that they were doing that. And well, there's other things that they did that's why they're being celebrated. But they were this bad person as well. Yeah, but they did all this other stuff. So we're gonna tear it down because they did, X many of deeds wrong, whatever that is. Well, then there goes every statue, because everybody's done something wrong, right? So if you want a statue or a memorial or whatever removed, you need to go through the system that's established to remove it. And if that system says no, then you try again. And if it matters enough to you, you can do it. The argument I heard about that was, well, but when Saddam Hussein fell out of power, because he was kind of dead, they tore his statue down. They didn't wait for any authority to say that was okay. True, they did do that, but that doesn't make that right. They could have waited until there was authority and gotten permission. They could have. They could have left the statue up and put up a sign that said, the reason why the statue was here because of this, this, and this, and not let it be lost to history. But people won't necessarily forget the name Saddam Hussein because he is a part of history now. But I mean, there's pros and cons to taking down statues, and one con could be it erases history to some degree. So, Maybe you put it in a museum instead of having it in the town square. I don't know. But at any rate, so there's some echoes of destroying and revising history still alive even today. I remember as a personal account, which doesn't really matter that much. Well, it doesn't matter at all, but I'll do it anyways. Which is that when I was younger, Christopher Columbus discovered America, and it was until I was older. Nope, no, he didn't. He didn't discover it. He wasn't the first, and the meeting with the Indians, yeah, that didn't go down that well. They were kind of mean to the Indians. The natives, no, there wasn't peace and harmony and love. There was a lot of war. The peace treaties came later, but way later. So it was like, oh, why was I taught this incorrect version of history the first time around? I don't know, but there you go. Let's see. Ever see that movie Agora with Julia Roberts? She's in ancient times when the Christians take over Alexandria. There were people there. It's like discovering someone's background. Or backyard. I don't know what that movie. No, I haven't seen that movie. It's Rachel Waltz, not Julia Roberts. So I don't know who it is. I haven't seen that movie, and I don't know how accurate the movie portrays history. I mean, there's a movie where Abraham Lincoln's fighting zombies. So, does that mean that Abraham Lincoln fought zombies? No. So, not based on true events. Why don't I stream on Facebook? I don't know how to stream on Facebook. And most of my viewers are here on YouTube, so that's what I do. I think I've gone over everything I wanted to go through for this particular topic, and I streamed this because it's easier than recording it and then uploading it that way, so it's just a little bit easier. If anybody wants to join in, then we can talk about random stuff. We could do that. Otherwise, I think I'm going to close this and see what else I can get myself into. That it sounded better in my head than it did out loud. Anyone want to join in? Say yes, and I'm going to give you, I don't know, a few moments to say yes. You want to join in? And nobody's saying yes in the chat. This is great. That's a good way to end the video or the stream or whatever you want to call it. Did you all see my video with the Hitler introduction? And if you did, why didn't you leave comments about how awesome the intro was? That one, whatever. I gotta let that go, man. I gotta let it go. I gotta do next one on that Batang's Bad Logic series. It's sitting there waiting for me to get to it. See, this month I was gonna be completely on vacation this month, and I'm not leaving actually until the 14th. So I'm like, oh, I guess I'm not technically on vacation, so I'll do some videos. And I'm like, oh yeah, there's that series I need to do because I was gonna finish that. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm on vacation this month. But here I am. I'm still doing stuff. Facebook so we get more popular. I'm never gonna get popular. Paul wants to do a thing. I don't know, Paul. Maybe we'll do a thing on your channel. How about that? Let's do that. Then meh, I guess I could. It would take me a few minutes to find my microphone. Oh, I love these responses. Okay, I guess that will be it. If I do a thing, maybe Johnny can host it, and that might be a thing. So Johnny, are you still there? Johnny? Wow, my voice cracked. What was up with that? Johnny, host a thing. No. Okay. All right. I guess that's it then. One person said yes. Sorry, Paul. Yes to joining for Paul. I was hoping more people would say yes. So I think I'll be done then. Okay, so Johnny's gonna host a thing, so you can join Johnny's thing. All right, great. I'll join Johnny's thing. Everyone meet up at Johnny's. Goodbye, everybody. Lobsters exist. Paul can yell at me later for saying that I would do a thing and then not doing the thing, I guess. Sorry. Yeah. Well, laziness prevails. I don't know. All right. I'm going to stop broadcast now. The chat will self-destruct in several seconds after I did that. Kaboom.